Prior to founding DIGSAU in 2007, the four of us worked together, as Paul said, at Kieran Timberlake, where we got the opportunity to be on a number of the same project teams and run some complex projects at a variety of scales. And we also discovered that we had a common interest in starting a practice of our own, one that was really enthusiastic about exploring a number of different project types. At the same time, we wanted to be involved in making things and places that inspired. We were committed to working hard, and we wanted to make sure that we had a fun time doing it. So the name DIGSAU is really an invented word. We kind of liked it phonetically. We found it to be amusing, and it also happened that the internet domain name was free and clear. I think in October of 2007, a Google search of DIGSAU yielded 2 hits, and they were both just sort of 6 letters in a row as part of an obscure economics equation where they had come together. And I think as of this morning, there are close to 13,000 hits for DIGSAU, so I guess the economics equation caught on or something. So like any architecture idea where it becomes meaningful through its making and its occupancy, the name DIGSAU gains meaning through becoming and producing. And currently, its meaning is probably best described as a 14-person collaborative firm where all voices are heard and many ideas are enthusiastically explored. And I'd be remiss not to mention our 15th member, our imaginary leader, Jim DIGSAU. We're an equal partnership in the classic Philadelphia Quakerly sense, and many of our decisions are made in a consensus basis. And so from the beginning, we would joke about how decisions that no one really wanted to take on, we'd just push up the ladder to Old Man DIGSAU. And mysteriously, this portrait made its way to the wall of our office, and we've kept it there, and he greets everyone that comes into the office, and I guess he's the guy we refer people to if they're an overly aggressive salesman. We send them to Jim's voicemail or something like that. But our studio aspires to develop spaces that, through somewhat conventional and traditional means of space, form, material, and light, create spaces that convey potent ideas and connect to the human spirit. Our inspirations come from all directions. Our projects employ selective use of high-tech production, manufacturing, and documentation technologies coupled with more traditional low-tech techniques that basically celebrate the patina of materials, the imperfections of human labor, and the virtues of chance. We're a projects-based firm. We have a very wide view of what architecture is, how it's made, and who makes it. We're interested in projects that fit into that broad view of architecture, and we allow ourselves to be changed by the diversity of the projects that we take on. Tonight, we're going to introduce the office by presenting our projects as a collection of stories. Like the structure of Ovid's Metamorphosis, which jumps from transformative tale one to another, sometimes on point and sometimes in a more excursively down seemingly dead-end tangents. We hope that the works that we show tonight demonstrate a focus on elevating the human experience. Authorships of the stories aren't singular, and many of the stories that we present tonight are not complete. But in 5.5 years, this represents a snapshot of how our office shapes architecture, and conversely how the projects that we do have shaped us as a firm. So Jamie's going to take over now and kind of talk about 3 of our first projects and how they shaped at least initially, what we're becoming.
Thank you, Jules. So I do have the pleasure of talking about 3 of our early works, and they're, I think, all interesting projects in some ways, and certainly amusing stories in other ways. And we think all were sort of formative in shaping the direction of the firm. And the first is what we call CTEC, the Challenge Program Construction Training and Education Center. And this was a project we did with a not-for-profit in Wilmington, Delaware, that works with at-risk youth, teaching them vocational skills. And it grew out of a wooden boat building school, and has now become a program that teaches all forms of construction skills while working with the kids to learn to earn their GED. And the site of the project's a site along the edge of the Christina River in Wilmington, Delaware, the former home of both the shipbuilding facility and a train building facility. And now, interestingly enough, the home of a replication of a 17th century Swedish tall ship that initially settled the only Swedish colony in the Americas. So certainly an interesting context for really any project. And what the Challenge Program had, what they didn't have was money. And what they did have was really an abundance of sort of marginally skilled trainee labor and salvage materials, and in particular a lot of timbers from warehouses in the Wilmington area that they had deconstructed over the years. And the design that we came up with was really conceived as a component of their educational program. And so the idea was that the trainees would build every component of the building that they could. And that really started through working with our engineers to design foundations that they could set and rebar that they could set. And the structural system was designed to use all bolted connections so that the trainees could work with the steel fabricators in erecting the structural system. The interiors were used as much of the reclaimed material as we could employ, including end-block wood floors that were made from the timbers that they had salvaged. This is an image we like, but it's the shop floor, and it's slightly unfinished state. It's a little less irregular at this point. And the exterior of the building employed these rain screen panels, a sort of repetitive system of 4x4 rain screen panels that used random widths and species and sizes of lumber that they had available in kind of a quilt-like way, a way that really sort of expressed the hands of each of the individual trainees and really, in a sense, was rich enough texturally to make up for a sort of vast discrepancy in the skill level that the program had as really inherent to its mission. And I guess one of the downsides about working on a project which is as much an educational program as it is anything is that the product is often a little less important than the process. And so while a number of projects have come and gone since we started working on this building, it remains an active project in the office and not much beyond what you're seeing here. It's sort of become for us a testament to the durability of commercial wrap in many ways. Now the next project, also an early project, we called the Cornmobile. And the Cornmobile grew out of a competition we did really early on, which was for a parking space in Philadelphia, kind of like Parking Day, which occurs in many cities. In this case, we imagined a fleet of what we called agromobiles, and we imagined that these sort of mobile planters that were built on the chassis of old cars could be deployed all over the city and sort of use parking lots and parking spaces in a way that sort of elicited some interest in these choices we've made about roads and cars and agriculture. And we ended up winning, or being one of the winners, and not having really thought it through, we failed to realize that we'd be asked to build an agromobile, and we were given $300 to do that, which is not a lot for building an agromobile. But this is where I think we learned a lesson that served us well, and that is that if you have an idea that is outlandish enough, and if you have enough enthusiasm, you can really get people to participate pretty easily. And so in this case, we got a sculptor, we got a woodworker, we got a really fine graphic arts firm, House Industries, we got a couple farmers, and we got our friends at the Challenge Program to help us build, what would become the Cornmobile. And it started with this 1971 Bronco that we got at the junkyard called the OJ Mobile. And we started working on it. We cut out the engine. We salvaged all the parts to try to get a little extra money for our budget. We cut the roof off. We painted it some more, filled it with earth and about 120 ears of corn, and the Cornmobile was born. And the Cornmobile spent some time out on the streets of Philadelphia, here in front of Williams-Sonoma, which I'm sure they loved, before finally it did meet its demise, and we did pick most of the corn, and it was salvaged. And I think, again, here, for us, the important lesson was really the improvisational spirit of the project that kind of took it from a rather static concept to something that for us really became quite captivating and joyful. And the last project that I'll talk about we call the floating house. So it's Cornmobile, and now it's the floating house. And in this case, the project was for a client who was a friend and a master builder and project manager that we'd worked with for a number of years. And he had a property along the Susquehanna River in New York where he built an earth ship. And for those that don't know, an earth ship is sort of a passively ventilated, passive solar building house made of tires, earth-filled tires sort of embedded into the ground. One of the things about building an earth ship along the banks of a river prone to flooding is that it flooded. It flooded fairly regularly. And the beauty of our client was that his response to this was to go find a couple salvaged pontoons and a bunch of sort of one-by larch that he'd already salvaged, and asked us to design for him a floating house where he could stay when the earth ship was flooded. So we did some pretty casual research on hydrodynamics, and we started looking at the river's edge, and in particular at the kind of experience of being on the river's edge and looking through a lattice work of branches and of structures along the river's edge. And we got interested in beaver dams and beaver lodges and their sort of structural capacity, the ability of the structure to use these little sticks to make something that's fairly robust. And we took that idea and we created a structural system that sort of built on that idea and created an enclosure that was sort of both solid enough to be enclosure, but porous enough to kind of evoke the natural setting that the house was intended for. So here's an early drawing of the design. Here's some renderings that we prepared to convince our client that it was a good idea, which really, in his case, wasn't hard to do. And then over the course of a weekend, probably a little more, they set out with their larch and constructed the floating house, which really never quite got finished and does remain an evolving project. But we think that's really in kind of true beaver spirit. So this is more or less where things stand. Now, I'll turn it over to Mark for more serious discourse.
So the next 4 projects are a little more conventional, and they all began and finished in the time that the Challenge Program has certainly been ongoing. So we'll look at a total of 4 projects here, that 2 in Philadelphia and 2 in Delaware with varying urban conditions. And the first project is a project that we secured in downtown Philadelphia in a fantastic spot in Center City, Logan Square, which is located right in between City Hall and the Art Museum, and really a threshold type of space at the beginning of Fairmount Park in Philadelphia, which is one of the largest municipal parklands in the country, and if not the world, at 9,200 acres. And this particular site also has incredible architectural and artistic features around it, including the Basilica of St. Peter and Paul, which has just been recently restored, and its brownstone exterior really sings at this point, and the monumental Swan Fountain, which is located at the center of the square, and really kind of a key feature in Center City, Philadelphia. So the site, when we arrived there, was quite derelict, despite its location in really a central part of the city, but hadn't really been taken care of or tended to over time, and was a spot that after working with the design team, we began to transform in our mind from a public square to really the starting point of Fairmount Park, either a seed of Fairmount Park that had kind of landed down in the center of the city, or really the doorstep that allows you to transition out of the urban context and into the more natural settings of the park. And a part of that research we did looked at the park structures throughout Fairmount Park, and some of the natural structures and shelters in that space as well. And we used those as a point of inspiration and a place to draw from and abstract. The project itself was one that we was really an intense collaboration with a very talented landscape firm in Philadelphia, Studio Brian Haynes, who happens to be here tonight. And we really see this project as one of kind of creative collaboration. So there's kind of shared ownership throughout. But the project itself is situated on the east side of Logan Square, with the Basilica down in front. On the left there is the Sister Cities Fountain, which is dedicated to the 10 sister cities of Philadelphia, and you see the picture on the lower left there. And to the far right is a more naturalistic discovery garden for children to experience informal play and in a more naturalistic setting. And in the middle of that, those two elements, is the Park Pavilion. And this is a visitor center and a cafe which, through the work of the Center City District and Brian and the design team, began to look at this park as not just open parkland, which is sometimes very active and activated in the city, but one that it's a programmed space that has the Sister Cities Fountain, the Discovery Garden portion of it, and the cafe visitor center, which draws folks in. The verticality of the city is really, this is in part of the design thinking of the project. It was really a condensation of the entire Fairmount Park experience down into this small parkland, where you move from the verticality of the city through the space and in this short threshold of a building, taper down to a smaller scale, childlike, if you will, but one that is more scaled and protected. The materials of the building was one, as a public project were certainly a place that we had a lot of focus and really spent a lot of time looking at what the stone materials are, how the jointing would work, patternings, etc. And I think for us as a firm, in the midst of working on the Cornmobile and the floating house, this was a project that presented itself as a real kind of a rare opportunity to have a project in the public realm in the city that we all live in and have children and kind of inhabit on a daily basis. And so I think it really, we took a hold of this and invested ourselves and the entire design team pushed it through with that in mind. The next project is very different in that it is a project in a less urban, kind of an edge, more of an edge urban condition in South Philadelphia in the Philadelphia Naval Yard. And this is an active naval yard that back in the 50s, you're seeing the photo now, was in full production mode, but that tapered off and really they shut down their operations in the mid-90s. So it, as a lot of these industrial sites and military bases, was really searching for a new life and a new birth. And currently, you drive on to the campus setting there, and you'll find kind of ghost shipyard with really incredible scale, buildings that are dwarfed by the size and scale of some of these ships. It also happens to be near the airport, so it has a regular passage of flight patternings through over the site. And the developer worked out a master plan with Robert Stern that took on some typical trappings of a campus master plan with a large boulevard that became kind of the organizing feature. But when we entered onto the scene, the context really wasn't there. So where the client wanted an urban response, there wasn't an urban context really to work within. Additionally, the project was a speculative office building. So this is back in 2010, and an adventurous client certainly to be thinking about a spec office building at that point. What it meant is that the client and the use of the building was really up in the air. So we were designing an open shell for future use, and the client liked to throw around terms, utilize terms like glowing lantern and a jewel box. So it became a study in glass and curtain wall, which quickly we determined was outside of the budget of the project. So as the project unfolded, the core of the building migrated to the south side of the building and allowed what was really a more environmentally sound southern face of the building with abstracted window patterns, balanced on the northern side with glass curtain wall that responded to the open office floor plate. I think one of the things that we really wanted to employ here was kind of an abstraction of those forms and not mimic the ship forms, but really just kind of pick up on what was a lack of scale or a play of scale in those spaces. The interior of the spaces was balanced with that kind of more textured, colder exterior with a lot of warmth and natural materials. The next project is one in small town USA on Main Street in Newark, Delaware. It's the University of Delaware campus bookstore, and we were invited to participate in an RFP process with 10 other firms to develop their kind of big box retail campus bookstore, which you see the recent Rowan University one on the left. And we were helped along in that process with some sketches provided in the RFP of where they thought the project might go. So we kind of absorbed this and realized that it wasn't necessarily a place that we wanted to take the project, and really challenged that, that framework through the RFP and by developing a site plan that carved away that big box and gave some of that space back to the urban surroundings. The program included some university office space on the 3rd floor, which we differentiated and created a vertical tower to mark that entry. And the other thing that we really focused on was developing integration between the inside and the outside of the building, which is not typical of the big box kind of pull you out of your car into a space scenario. Some of the other urban cues here was there was several historic brick buildings in the vicinity that we made an effort to highlight by utilizing a charcoal brick and a darker color of the building, and really allow the red brick of the existing buildings kind of act as as the primary participants against this, what we presented as a textured abstraction of their campus monk bond. And then the inside had a similar type of arrangement with a wood wayfinding system that worked your way through the building. The final project here is it pulls you out of each of those urban conditions into a more rural agricultural location located in southeast, Delaware. This is a kind of an adventurous client that lived in a suburban tract home and decided, after reading many issues of Dwell, that they wanted to move out of their current living conditions, and imagined kind of a loft-like space ranch house located in this suburban, or not suburban, but rural area. The caveat that they threw at us at the beginning was an incredibly low budget. And so right out of the gate, we tried to keep things simple. We found a good partner in a contractor down in Delaware who was really excited about pulling down a barn in the near vicinity and utilizing that siding for the building, which we liked that texture and that kind of gravitas that it brought to really what is a fairly simple building with simple construction. I think I'm going to hand it off to Jules here.
Jeff's not just standing back there. He's going to get a chance to talk too. The Chrysler Town is a project for University of Delaware that came our way while we were doing the bookstore project, and it was certainly at a scale that was unique to our firm. The university had recently purchased a 270-acre Chrysler automobile assembly plant that was obviously no longer in use, and they had plans to turn it into basically a technology town, complete with hotels and an Amtrak stop and a fairly self-sufficient, independent new town adjacent to campus. And most notably in the Chrysler facility is the assembly building, the main assembly building, the one highlighted here, which was almost 100 acres large, and really some stunning photographs that were taken of that assembly building a few months before it was demolished. Here's a picture of the inside, and you start to get a sense of how large this facility was and the amount of steel that existed there. In fact, so much steel that the university made more than $10 million from the demolition process alone because the steel was so valuable for recycling. But the liability that they were left with was a giant 30-inch deep slab on grade that would cost millions of dollars to demolish and to abate. And so one of the main ideas of our proposal used the Piazza Navona as a precedent and looks at how that space is shaped by the Stadium of Domitian from Imperial Rome that they just built on top of. And so the memory of Domitian's stadium is still with us in modern-day Piazza Navona. We took that idea and applied it to that 30-inch deep slab on grade and said, what if, instead of tearing it up, we use that as not a slab on grade, but a massive spread footing that could then be used to, accommodate any number of light to medium-sized modular structures. So the kind of double Portland grid, which you see on the right-hand side, which is one type of urbanism, was flanked to its left with this giant slab on grade that was accommodating for much larger and unexpected structures. For instance, if Boeing needed 5 million square feet and that was how the deal was going to get done, you put them over there. And that big slab on grade could accommodate that kind of space, while a more traditional type of development might emerge right next door. And so the thought was that, I'm just going to scroll through a couple of these, that the middle zone would really be remaster planned every couple of years, and the northernmost part at the top of the page just kind of followed a very simple and straightforward plan. At a much smaller scale, I'm switching now to a series of artist residences that we went after in a competition that we didn't win, but what you see here is a Elliott Toric composition, and Elliott Toric compositions are notable for some amount of structure and some amount of chance. So not kind of like John Cage type total chance stuff, but actually a little bit of a structure that defines the foundation, and in detail performers are allowed to improvise. And we took that idea and tried to carry it over to a construction methodology. And the program was to design a number of artist houses. And the houses were supposed to be built by the artists that were guests in residence on this art farm. And they would be involved with building it, and they would live in the house for a period of 6 months and would become more in touch with the land through the process of occupying the house that they built. And so the proposal we came up with was one that we see a diagram of how the process of the building was made, and it's as much about the making of the building as it is about occupying the building. And the procedure, 1, 2, 3, 4, was to stack mounds of earth with some amount of guidelines, but for the most part the mounds are somewhat randomly stacked. The mounds become formwork for a concrete shell. The house is then excavated and then occupied several feet below the ground plane. So you occupy this lower horizon. So throughout the day, if you're in the house, you're kind of more in touch with the ground, with your horizon being maybe a foot above ground level. And then the thought being that eventually these structures, after their useful life, give way and become hopefully wonderful ruins. Each one a little bit different, shaped by the initial forming of the soil, but adherent to the rules that were laid out. The next is a competition that we did last summer, and again at a really monumental scale. This was for a performing arts village in Montana for a philanthropic couple that was very interested in the arts and wanted to build a very substantial performing arts village in Montana. The 4 firms that were invited to compete in the competition were Snøhetta, Saucier Perot, Boll and Swinsky Jackson, and much to our surprise, DIGSAU. So we were happy to be in good company with all of the Arup consultants at our disposal. Arup was they were running the competition and spent time with this client traveling the world in search of the perfect performing arts facilities. And as you can tell, it was really a spectacular landscape that we were working with, 14,000 acres of it. And kind of overwhelmed by the monumentality of this undertaking, we asked Michael Van Valkenburg's office if they would team up with us, and they did, and that was a great experience for us. The solutions ranged from small-scale performance follies in the landscape to rather sophisticated concert halls, several of which we really got into the inner workings of, all in about a month-and-a-half competitions. There was a lot of ground to cover. There was an outdoor amphitheater, really a master plan for how to even begin to think about 14,000 acres of land, and additional programs such as libraries, galleries, extra artist housing, and such. In the end, they never picked a winner, so we had hoped that we'd at least be able to brag about losing to Snøhetta in a competition or something like that, but instead there were 4 losers, and so we've kind of wondered what to do with this project, and in the process we made some really great models using a technique that Michael Van Valkenburg's office uses, and we've, as of late, taken to projecting on these models, and currently there's a show up at Temple University where some of the models are up on the wall with animated projections and stills from the competition, so we got that out of it. And I'm going to speed up a little bit. The Vale Garden is a competition that we did with Studio Brian Haynes back in 2010, and for those that don't know the International Garden Festival, it's really a spectacular event that showcases contemporary thinking in garden design. The Redford Gardens has a wonderful series of traditional gardens and then this fabulous festival grounds that every year adds a few new wonderful conceptual gardens. Ours is a riff on the traditional paradise garden of ancient Mesopotamia, and it looks at a more decentralized version of that popular landscape precedent. And the materiality is chain link fence and landscape material, and it's a very decentralized version of the original typology that never really allows you to see the whole garden at once, but you just see it quadrant by quadrant through these little apertures, and then the rest of the garden is veiled behind layers of chain link. And now entering its 4th year in the festival, the garden has evolved, and the human sensations of climbing and chasing and playing have added a new vitality to the project, and nature takes over in very interesting and joyful ways. We're actively involved in its construction each year. We return in the spring to make some modifications and get our fix of hanging chain link, which is really kind of a grueling experience. But this year we are looking at a new up and over path built out of chain link, which takes us even further away from the initial Paradise Garden concept, and the meaning of this project has really evolved through its use and its modifications. We're also looking at maybe painting it pink or fuchsia, or this week we hope to do some roller paint tests on chain link to see if there's a way to brighten this thing up a bit. So this is an interesting project in that it came to what may have been its completion in 2010, but has actually, fortunately, become an ongoing work for us. And Jeff is now going to talk about work that's on the boards and give a look into the future of where we're headed.
All right, we've got, according to my clock here, we have 5 minutes.
so I'm going to speed. Discway Hall is a interesting project at Drexel University. The interesting thing to us was that the site was that white airspace zone above an auditorium attached to a science tower. This is a view on the bottom, standing on that rooftop, looking out down on a new plaza space that's being conceived. So here's the new plaza space, which is being done by Andrew Pogon. The building that we're doing is this addition in the air above the existing auditorium against the tower. It's a tutoring terrace. The interesting thing about the structure is that we're not going to interfere at all with the auditorium. We're putting a truss and then hanging the floor. The truss supports an addition to the chemistry lab on the 3rd floor, and hanging from that truss is the tutoring space, which is the glassy volume, which really helps to form that space on the plaza. All right, Academy Street, dining student residential project at the University of Delaware. They keep bringing us back for some reason. Here the problem was they wanted to really bring the student population back to the core of campus along the green. The way to do that was to build new student residential facility as well as a new dining facility. The problem with that is that the buildings that everyone loves so much that form that green are small, Georgian buildings. So the challenge became, how do we bring a whole lot of building but not make it feel like a whole lot of building? And the solution became to pull up the ground plane, and this was done again in collaboration with Studio Brian Haynes, and really treating the bulk of the building, which is a footprint of about that size on scale with the large buildings across the street, and not really in scale with the residential buildings, but putting that thing underground and letting the residential buildings come up, as is shown in this section. It's really a large planted roof that even covers the loading dock, so that the building itself just gets integrated into the campus landscape, becomes a pathway through campus, continuing some of the connections that are being made by the green itself, and allowing us to bring the scale of the buildings down, and also introduce some topography to one of the flattest states in the country. The Matchbox is a project at Swarthmore College. It's in the athletic, in the zone of the athletic facilities, which is this amazing roofscape, these red roofscapes of buildings, and we've been asked to put a new building on one of the existing foundations. The new building is a 3-story building. We were imagining this, we're kind of inspired by the forest around it and looking at it as a 3-tiered building, a canopy, which is a more solid meeting space, a fitness space, which occupies the ground plane, and then underneath kind of a weight room, more heavy stuff. And it's really carving the landscape and connecting back to that strange roofscape that makes up the adjacent buildings. And then an addition at Wilmington Friends School. We're really intrigued by this campus. It's a common problem or an issue that we're finding that schools and nonprofit institutions are coming to us for, which is to clarify. They finally step back after continuing to add on to a building and want to step back and now try to clarify what exactly that they've done. They asked us to add 6 classrooms. And rather than add another addition, another building to already a series of 6 buildings that are interconnected, we thought of each classroom as its own little pavilion, making a connection to the historic structure on the campus, which is at the top of this drawing, and connecting this massive buildings out to the little farmhouse. We're going to finish with Dogfish Head, which in some ways has been our story has paralleled theirs. They hired us when we had no business getting hired. They didn't really know what architecture was, so their naivete brought us into the door. They asked us to initially just look at their space to do an office interior fit out. We quickly learned that they needed way more space than they had available in the building. We're also somewhat shocked that Dogfish Head is known for being a beer company that does off-centered ales for off-centered people, that they were inhabiting this facility, which is completely symmetrical and it was initially a cannery, but had been completely reclad in a stucco and brick kind of extravaganza of symmetry. And the entry, in fact, wasn't even that center entrance. That was a false entry because they used the one in the back. We went and toured the facility and got really just captivated by the different materials and the process that they go through to make beer. Both on one hand, their experimental nature, on the other hand, their scientific rigor in replicating the recipe once they've hit it. The initial program of the building was just simply additional office space because they were running out of office space, but we saw the problem as really making a place at this otherwise just kind of desolate entry. And we really wanted to capture that, what had been a fire access lane, and turn it into a place that kind of tapped into the culture of the company and allowed for their big events such as bocce, which is something that people do there while they're waiting for the next tour, and really allowed this place to become a destination. The combination of people wanting to go there to see how the beer is made and the success of and the demand for their beer led their founder, Sam, to call us in for a more strategic approach to how to develop their place. He also was intrigued and still is intrigued by these Disney cartoons that talked about Paul Bunyan, which resonated with him as a Massachusetts kid. He wanted a forest. He wanted this place to be in a forest. We worked with Julie Bargman and Dirt, sitting around the table talking about what they wanted, looking at the land they had available, and understanding what facilities they would need to continue to increase their beer production capacity, but also looked at it from the standpoint of bringing visitors to a special place, a destination that people literally have driven across the country to come see. The resulting model was turned into a campus master plan, which was a series of additions to the main plant, which included a front end where raw materials are brought in, and then at the back end, a new warehouse to both bottle and store the beer. And we wanted to really understand how visitors could come and experience that process, because it really is captivating. So this is the entire facility. The red is the greenhouse, which is this really amazing structure that we absolutely had nothing to do with because it's completely defined by setback lines and turning radii of trucks, but it's some of the coolest interior spaces we've ever done. Just the height of the required heights and the strange leftover spaces between them are amazing. The warehouse had a different problem. It's all the way at the other end of the site. We needed to get people there, so we really worked with the team at Dirt to develop a pathway that got you to the building, and then a way into the building itself, which is really a big bottling facility. So visitors can come up, find their way to this beacon, this balcony that comes out of the side of the warehouse, find their way in, and take a look at the production of the beer and where it's warehoused, and the trucks are coming to pick it up. It's a really kind of fun and exciting place. It's one of the best parts of the tour. Up in safety, out of harm's way, in this suspended balcony. And perhaps the coolest thing is that so the beer's made in the one building, but it's bottled in the other, so it has to make its way in a beer line, which parallels the path that visitors would take on their way to complete the tour. This is the new grain house. These are some of these amazing spaces that came out of that. You know, again, we had really nothing to do with it. It was all driven by clear height requirements and zoning setbacks. This is the warehouse, and the approach to the warehouse. The cladding is a very simple rain screen system that uses cedar, which is similar to, not the actual wood that they use in their aging process, but one that does well outside. And we came with a rain screen wall system that allowed us to modulate the direction of the wood to just try to break down the scale of this massive building. Sam had a vision of circle windows. He gave us a sketch with circle windows. So the circle window has become kind of the trademark once it got into this building, and these circles are going to make their way back into the existing facility. The visitor's balcony is up above there, clad in the Corten steel, the same that made that was used to make the steampunk treehouse, which is that funky sculpture at the entry court. And then finally, this is the entry, or in this case, if we were exiting out of the warehouse and back out onto the balcony, which overlooks the the lagoon that captures stormwater from the entire site and the surrounding neighborhood. The next portion of the project in the future is this kind of entry point to the project off of the parking lot. And so we've learned a lot from Dogfish Head. It's a company that has grown quickly. We haven't grown as quickly as they have, but in some ways we've paralleled what they've done in terms of they're very, they continue to try to innovate and do new things. They have a fearless leader in Sam. I think our difference is that we have 4 of us, and as our colleagues in the crowd will tell you, we rarely agree with each other, but what we've found is that the strength of the dialogue that forms in those disagreements causes each of us to have to state a case and to make an argument, and it's really that dialogue between the 4 of us and with the rest of our colleagues in the office that really drives these projects. This is the first time, probably in 5.5 years, that we've taken some time to step back and try to look at what we've done. We really tackle each project kind of ferociously and don't think about too much. We don't really think about the big picture of what we're doing. So I don't know that we came up with any answers, and I don't know that we will. And I'm not even sure that we're trying to. I think what we have found is that we're inspired by projects, and we've tried to push even projects where it didn't seem like there was room to push, and somehow we're still here 6 years later. So again, we're honored to be here. Thank you so much. We can't wait to hear from Luke and Zoe, and thanks for coming out.